The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Coming up next, we'll reflect on an infamous historical event that took place in southern Minnesota. Stay with us. You're watching Diversity Connections. Welcome to this episode of Diversity Connections. I'm Bukata Hayes. Thank you for joining us. I'm pleased to introduce Nakoma Volkman and Robert Sanborn. They are here to share with us an understanding of Native American history. And in particular today, we'll talk about what happened in Mankato and the Sioux Uprising. And before we begin, I would like to even go a little bit deeper and talk about the term Sioux. How did it come about?
The correct term for the people that are called Sioux is Dakota. Dakota. And we speak three different dialects of the language. We speak Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota. There are many different subgroups, what people would call bands, of the Dakota Nation. The term Sioux got stuck on us from the enemies of the Dakota, who were the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwa, which is part of my blood heritage. But there was conflict that went on between the Dakota and the Anishinaabe for probably 1,000 years and at least 500 years anyway. And there's a word in the Anishinaabe or Ojibwa language, Nadia Sioux. Now I don't speak that language, so I hope I'm pronouncing it right, but it's Nadia Sioux. And the Ojibwa used that term towards the Dakota people, meaning enemies, snakes in the grass, little snakes. We don't like them. The French in the early days picked up on that and shortened it from Nadia Sioux to just Sioux. And that's how that term got stuck on the Dakota people. Now, it's been used for so many years, even by our own people, that it's a common term. It does have an insulting origination, even though it is used commonly today. Most tribes are trying to go back to their original names. A lot of the tribes were stuck with a name given to them by outsiders that aren't correct. And are going back to their original names, just like Ojibwa and Chippewa. Anishinaabe is the correct term. With the so-called Sioux, Dakota is the correct term.
When we talk about the uprising that was in Mankato, definitely I think an infamous part of Minnesota's history. I'm from Mankato, so definitely an infamous part of Mankato's history. Could you talk a little bit about the events that led up to it, some of the key historical figures that were also a part of that particular conflict?
Well, I think maybe one of the most important dates, other than the actual beginning of the conflict, in I believe August of 1862, August 17th, there was a previous treaty. I think it was 1851 that had been signed and violated so many times. I'm not sure that any of the payment that the Dakota people were supposed to receive ever actually got to them.
And this was between the Dakota and the
government.
The government.
Okay. Traverse des Sioux, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, there were a couple of treaties in 1851, I think, that are often mentioned.
Right.
And you know, with the depletion of the game in the area and the arrival of all the settlers, the people were starving and hungry and angry, and so this whole thing had been simmering for the better part of 11 years, to the point where it just kind of boiled over.
Who are some of the key historical figures or central figures within that?
Well, one of the figures that you rarely hear about in any culture, any people, any tribe, you always have mavericks. You have bad apples in the bushel, as they say. Mm-hmm. And one of those in those days who was didn't go along with a lot of the chiefs and so on was Inkpaduta. Mm-hmm. And he did lead a group of men south into Iowa at that time and did kill some white people, mm-hmm. and then came north and killed some more. So there had been some, this was about 1857, about 5 years before the Dakota uprising or war. And so there's been some hostilities. Mm-hmm. The native people were being forced from their original lands. Mm-hmm. Wabasha and his people from the Winona area, for example, were sent to live along the Minnesota River. Everybody was being moved from their homeland, forced. And a lot of the land, of course, was given up in the treaty, but we didn't understand ownership of land.
Right.
We had no concept of owning a piece of land, mm-hmm. let alone millions of acres. Mm-hmm. So we had a different concept about it. We were caretakers of the Mother Earth and of land, not owners. Mm-hmm. And so we were easily deceived. Mm-hmm. Almost every treaty ever given with our people was defraud, mm-hmm. and we were frauded all over the place. Mm-hmm.
And I think from our perspective, we always have heard in a more typical background that you might have from getting a typical education that how great it was and how people gloated over buying Manhattan for $17 or whatever. Oh, what a great deal for us.
Right.
But I don't think any attempt, when you're so happy that you've just been able to pull something off like that, you're not going to go to any great lengths to explain what it means or help the people you're dealing with understand it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, there were agencies along the Minnesota River. For example, the lower agency were government agents, men who ran the trading business and were assigned as agents to distribute money to the tribes that were promised in the treaties, or distribute foodstuff, blankets, whatever it was. And they had the responsibility of distributing this to the people. Well, the people, in the first place, couldn't hunt and fish like they used to. They weren't permitted to just roam the country and do what they'd done for thousands of years. They were restricted. They were poor in the first place. They weren't happy because they were moved from their homeland to this area. The monies that were promised didn't arrive and didn't arrive and didn't arrive. The food didn't arrive. The Congress was late in enacting the act, whatever it was, to get this foodstuff and money to the Dakota people. And it did arrive in St. Paul.
Ironically, the same day that the outbreak took place.
And what did come to the warehouse at the lower agency, the agents would not distribute to the people. And here were the Dakota people, families, children, elders, the whole people waiting. They were starving. They couldn't. There was a bad crop growing season the fall before, very little harvest. There was no food. The people were starving. And of all things, the agent, Merrick,
Andrew Jackson Merrick,
made a statement that the Indians heard, and he said, "Let them eat grass." And it was just within a day he was found dead with grass stuffed in his mouth. Well, that was one of the things that started the so-called uprising. There were also some warriors that, through a kind of a stupid little thing, got involved with competition with a family over chicken eggs. And the settlers, several of them ended up being killed. And of course that precipitated the whole thing. It all came together, what we're talking about.
Confluence of events.
And wham, that started the war.
right. And so, what were the particular events for our viewers that led up to what would become to be known as that infamous part of Minnesota's history, in particular Mankato? What exactly happened in Mankato?
Well, it really didn't start in Mankato. The other towns that were closer to the upper and lower Sioux agencies got hit first. Not all the chiefs were in favor of fighting. Wabasha was against it. Big Eagle was against it. Some of the others just didn't want to fight, despite all the atrocities done to the people. They said, "No, let's wait some more time. Well, we're starving. No, let's wait." But the chiefs didn't always have total control of the people. It's always portrayed in Hollywood movies where the chief he's the law and order and everything. Well, it wasn't always that way with the tribes. And if you had some hotheads, some young hotheads in the tribe that said, "No, we're not going to wait any longer," sometimes the chiefs didn't have anything to say about it. And the young men would go off and fight. And that's typically what happened. Eventually, there were still chiefs at the end who had stayed out of it. But a lot of the chiefs, because the majority of the people were so dissatisfied, so disgusted, angry, that they had to join in. Little Crow was one of the leaders of the uprising. He actually got wounded earlier and didn't participate in some of it. One town, of course, is New Ulm, where the Native Americans attacked, and there's still not exactly some great feelings between the people that live in that area and the Native Americans. I participated in an event one time in New Ulm, and I had a little bit of remarks to me about being there, being a Native American. One of them said, I think he had too much to drink during the beer festival, but I was walking down the aisle with all my regalia on, and he said, "I never saw a German Indian before." And I said, "Well, you're looking at one," because I am. I'm both Indian and German.
That's right. So
but anyway, that goes on today.
So in particular, in Mankato, as we talk about the uprising and the event that took place in Mankato, Robert, if you could tell me, who were some of those central figures, those key historical figures? We talked a little bit earlier about if you tested some high school seniors, they wouldn't know that particular person or particular people were involved in that. Could you talk a little bit about exactly what happened that day?
The executions?
Yes, absolutely, please.
I'm not. Do you know who any of the actual participants in the executions
I don't remember
were?
all their names because every time it's read at the Mankato powwow by our people, it's done in the Lakota language.
How many people?
38.
38.
There were 39. One was reprieved at the last moment, mainly because I think this is the one where his brother helped the white people to survive, helped some of them escape, and he pled for his brother who never apparently fired a shot, but he was just there, and he was.
That was a last-minute reprieve. It was going to be 39. We were mentioning earlier the role that President Lincoln played in that event. He pardoned 269 men who were originally
out of 303. Yeah, one of the persons who went to bat for the Dakota people was Episcopal missionary Whipple.
Henry
His name was Henry Whipple. And he actually went to Washington to plead with Lincoln to not execute anybody. And so Lincoln studied it. He had people helping him. He wanted only the ones that committed the most atrocity to, if anybody had to be hung. I don't think he was in favor of hanging any of them. But he ended up And our people don't look too favorably on Lincoln for having executed anybody.
Right, absolutely.
And as I said, they're honored every year at our Mankato powwow. But, you know, looking at it from both sides, prospectively, from Lincoln's standpoint, the settlers, the pioneers, who he was representing at the time, he was also fighting the Civil War at the same time. He had a lot on his shoulders, like President Obama has right now, you know. And Lincoln had that on his shoulders, and so this was kind of a sidetrack, but he diverted from the main cause for a while, and he just determined. I think he probably would have committed political suicide if he hadn't punish somebody.
Right, right.
I'm sure he didn't want to execute them, but anyway, our people now still don't look very favorably upon Abraham Lincoln.
And that particular execution in Mankato, I guess on record, is the largest mass execution
I believe so.
in our nation's history. I think that also plays significant when you think about the many things that this country has been through.
Probably one of the lesser known,
absolutely,
too, as well. I mean, you really don't hear much about it.
No, and I would venture to say that there's probably people living in Mankato today, as my community, who don't understand what exactly happened, its impact.
You mentioned that there's a library on that spot now.
Blue Earth County Library.
Is there some kind of documentation as you go in?
You know what? What there is it's called Reconciliation Park, and there's a statue of a bison across the street from the library, and that's supposed to be the symbol of a kind of a reconciling or an effort to reconcile. And so that's on one side across from the Blue Earth County Library. I was sharing a story about a particular professor within that community who is Dakota, and talking about the sense that she gets when she goes into that particular library, and how that connection is still alive today. And I think I would venture a guess that there's other folks who feel that same kind of feeling as they go in there. So I think the ongoing impact is still there from such an event. I was going to ask you, when you talked about some don't view Lincoln in that way, could you tell us how they view that particular event? What do they view as history has continued to move? Do they still feel, if you will, some feelings of distrust or hatred? And in particular, if you know, how do some feel when they come to Mankato?
Yeah. Well, our Native people dedicate that powwow to those 38. We feel in general that we were sticking up for our rights, we were protesting, we were so incensed back in 1862 at our treatment, you know, that that wasn't the only explosion of our people. I mean, this happened in other parts of the United States as well. Some didn't give up until 1890s, you know. But it's a fantastic atrocity. From a Native American standpoint, our Holocaust began in 1492, just among two peoples in the Caribbean where Columbus first arrived. Within 25 years after Columbus arrived, 5 million Arawak and Carib tribespeople had perished. Within 25 years, 5 million. And of course, it didn't stop there.
Right.
It went on for hundreds of years.
Right.
So when we say our Holocaust began, we don't dwell on that. I mean, that's generations ago. We can't blame ourselves for what our grandfathers did. But it's interesting to know what happened on both sides. There were atrocities on both sides, certainly.
There are really two histories there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And it also should be known that prior to the hangings of the 38, that 1,700 of our people were marched from the Minnesota River all the way to the territory just below Fort Snelling. And we were imprisoned there all winter long, a very bitter, cold winter. Hundreds of our people died. But those were men, women, children, people, a lot of Native tribes people that weren't even involved in it. But people tended, you know, if one person from a certain race kills somebody else, they blame the whole people, you know. And that happened with our people all the time.
And that's when the bounties began, too. Were there bounties before the uprising?
Probably, but I don't know anything about it.
I know there were official bounties after the uprising. And
bounties for Native Americans?
For white settlers who would kill a Native American and produce a scalp, I believe it was $25.
Well, Little Crow was killed, at least a year, if not 2 years after
1863.
1863.
Yeah. His bounty was $500.
And 2 settlers did shoot him and kill him. His son was with him. I can't recall his name, but his son was with him at the time. And his son became the founder of the YMCA among the Native people here in Minnesota.
I didn't know that.
Didn't know that either.
And Little Crow's body was mutilated by the white community and buried in manure. And eventually, I think it was, can't remember when it was, but eventually his bones were taken and with a good ceremony.
1971.
Buried in South Dakota.
When that finally happened.
But yeah, there was a huge camp of our people over that winter, camp just below Fort Snelling.
Right. And so with the lingering effects of what happened in Mankato, is the powwow a good step towards, if you will, reconciling that past?
There was a year, I can't remember how long ago, it might have been 10 years ago, when the powwow had the official reconciliation done with government representatives and so on. It's just a historical situation that we have to live with, and every year that powwow is dedicated to those 38 Sioux, 38 Dakota that were hanged. It's a very sad thing. All the names are read off. And that powwow, by the way, is welcome for the public. We have a fantastic time. Everybody's welcome. All the public is welcome to come out. It's always the first full weekend in September. If the first weekend in September has a Friday in it from the previous month, you can't count that. It's got to be the third full weekend in September. And it starts Friday evening, goes Saturday and Sunday. Lots of good food, lots of arts and crafts. It's a tremendously traditional affair. A lot of traditions carried on there by the elders and veterans, and dancing and singing and free camping, and the whole public is welcome to come. You're going to have a good time.
Right. I do know that a good portion of the Mankato community come out to support, and I think that's an effort too at educating themselves a little bit more about exactly what went on during that time. And so I do know that there's a good portion of the Mankato community and surrounding communities who come to partake in that particular event. And as we kind of wrap up talking about the uprising, is there particular nuggets of information that people don't know about what happened that you feel are important for people to take away?
Well, one might be that Mankato was named after Chief Makatong.
Perfect, absolutely.
The correct term that we use at the powwow is Makatong. And the chief was involved in, Chief Makatong was involved in the war, but one time when the military was fighting, I can't remember which battle it was at. It could have been Wood Lake, I'm not sure. But the cannon was fired, and he had so much pride that he refused to get out of the way of the cannonball, and he was killed. And that's what happened to Chief Makatong. You have any?
Robert, any?
Well, I've read an account somewhere that about the cannon. That was, they only had one cannon. But he was unfortunate enough to be struck by it.
Right.
Some of the battles were fought north of, way north of the Minnesota River, because there was a territory called the Plains, but then there was the Great Woods area, and it just kind of ran from Mankato throughout the map up into the north of Minnesota, and that was called the Big Woods. And there were some battles up in that area too, just east of, or west of the Big Woods, near Hutchinson. And it's up in that territory that Little Crow was shot by these
settlers. Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess I got one question for you, Bob. As you teach this particular portion, or do you teach this particular portion in your class? What are the responses of some of the students that as they learn this history?
I had a wonderful student project, not from my class this semester, but from a year ago when Nakoma first came to work with us about there's a current controversy over Fort Snelling, over I think just the direction of what renovations will be done and how people will feel, how the state wants people to feel when they visit that site. And a student did a wonderful presentation on the two very divergent sides of that particular issue.
Absolutely.
I think that's still being played out now, but my students are wonderfully open-minded about this subject. They're very curious about it. And of course, I think after they've been introduced to it by Nakoma, I give him a lot of credit for that, because I've been fortunate enough so far to have him as a guest, and he's the first person they learn from
as they come into
about the subject matter, and I learn along with them. And in a general sense, they're hungry for this information. They're grateful for it. They're very respectful of it, and it's fantastic for me. It's a great experience to enjoy it along with them and learn more.
Well, absolutely. Well, thank both of you for being here. Again, Nakoma Volkman, thank you for being here. Robert, thank you again. You're professor at RCTC. I don't think we mentioned that earlier. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Diversity means many things to different people. If you want to learn more, log on to ksmq.org, then select Diversity Connections. While you are there, you can see highlights from your favorite episodes, read the blogs, and submit your own experiences and ideas. Join us next time as we take a look at Native American regalia. Remember, you don't have to be afraid of the people and the stories that you hear on this show. From everyone at Diversity Connections, let's make this the community we dream about.